our friend, former colleague, Tulsi Gabbard, now director of National Intelligence, made some pretty historic moves. And through a post on X last night, posted, per the president's directive, I have revoked security clearance and barred access to classified information from Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Lisa Monaco, Mark Zaid, Norman Eisen, and it goes on, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Andrew Weissman, along with the 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. The president's daily brief is no longer being provided to former President Biden. So she wanted to clear up this, and clearly they're going through and they're kind of clearing the roles, if you will.
That's right. So this announcement is what many had hoped for or looked for, based off of those that have used their security clearance in a way that could be seen as weaponizing or politicizing that entire process. So you have the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who was the architect of the 51 signers of that Hunter Biden laptop letter before he was Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan, former national security advisor to President Biden, deep state creature. Lisa Monaco, former deputy attorney general. You have Norm Eisman, who worked on the first impeachment of President Trump for the Democrats in Congress. You have Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, obviously famous for their lawfare against President Trump in the lead up to this past election, 2024. And then you have Andrew Weissman, who was a part of the Bob Mueller team who investigated the Russia hoax in the first president's term. And then you have the 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. Those were the national security or former intelligence members of that community that said this is Russian disinformation, and they leaned on their expertise as being part of the intel community and having security clearance that you must trust us, this is Russian disinformation. We all know that was false, and it was meant to sway an election in 2020, and to some degree it did have an effect on the way that election turned out. But I think this move by Tulsi Gabbard is also showing that the overclassification of U.S. secrets, which is something we will talk about with Rick coming up, as well as how many security clearances there are out there, give an opportunity for people to monetize their security clearance. And these people have used their credentials as having security clearances to get jobs at large defense contractors, at think tanks, or to be able to try to give credibility to a letter they put out when they're trying to sway a voter's mind about an election. This is holding them accountable, and many of them, it is holding them accountable fiscally with their pocketbooks by saying you're no longer going to use your security clearance to either interfere with our elections and or profit off of past government service. There's a difference between what's the law and allowed and what is norm and tradition. The president's allowed to do this. Other presidents could have done this. But we have this fake idea of that every president has to be bound by specific tradition and not use some of their authority that they're allowed to do just because the person before you didn't do it. And I think that can be seen throughout the entirety of this administration. That is what people voted for. They were tired of the same old, same old. And so now you're seeing a president that is willing to be like, listen, these people weaponized their security clearance and their credentials against a political opponent. But this is how NBC News decided to phrase it. The decision is the latest example of the Trump administration's unprecedented use of security clearances to go after perceived political opponents. But what they didn't also say is that this is a direct response to 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter that in an unprecedented use of security clearance went after perceived political opponents. This works both ways.
And of course, she said that the president's daily brief is no longer being provided to former President Biden. Probably something that people didn't realize even still would have been happening once someone leaves office.
Well, and many times a former president, especially if they are younger, maybe more active, a lot of times that briefing is still given to a former president because a president will sometimes call the former president and seek advice. Many presidents have done that. I know that George W. Bush did give some advice to President Obama at times. One that was famous for people not wanting his advice was the late Jimmy Carter. He actually got those briefings and tried to weigh in. He would call the White House and try to give advice, and it was not well received by not just the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Obama administration. But that is something that does traditionally happen because they say it's the loneliest job in the world, being president, and it's an exclusive club, that sometimes you are facing decisions, especially about national security, that only a handful of living people have ever faced. And so there is that kind of camaraderie historically, not with this president. And it's nothing in the Constitution or law that says you have to be good buddies with your predecessor.
Right. It may be standard practice, maybe what's happening, but it's not something legally that has to continue.
When it comes to what Tulsi's doing, I think this is just another common sense approach to being accountable to the people. The people were outraged that this group abused their access to classified information by pretending that something was true when they knew it wasn't. And let me be specific. Most of these individuals never had a briefing on the Hunter Biden laptop and whether or not the intel services thought it was, misinformation or Russian information. There was never a briefing on that. There was never any raw intelligence pointing to that. This was a political calculation by these individuals, and their political calculations were wrapped in their access to classified information. They say things like, oh, I can't tell you, but trust me because I have access to classified information. They abused their position by getting involved in politics and pretending that they knew something. There are a couple of other people that do that regularly. Adam Schiff is one of them. And I think that it's important to hold these people to account. If you're going to have access to classified information, don't go into the public sphere and pretend something is true when it's not. Don't abuse your positions. They did, and Tulsi Gabbard is holding them to account and taking away that access to classified information. But when these individuals abuse their positions, that's when they should be cut off.
Appreciate it. I really wanted to know that, and I think our audience is better off knowing why this even happens. I think we can get lost in the headline and not understand the situations, but we have great people like you on our team to help explain all that, and I appreciate it.